যদি সবাই ফিরে যায়, ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা সবাই ফিরে যায়, যদি গহন পথে যাওয়ার কালে কেউ ফিরে না যায়, তবে পথের কাটা তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে, তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে, যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে। যদি আলো না ধরে, ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা আলো না ধরে, যদি ঝড় বাদলে আধার রাতে দুয়ার দেয় ঘরে, তবে বজ্রানলে আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা জলরে, আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা জলরে, যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে। একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো রে।
Hi guys, thank you for joining the live stream. Oh wait, एक light on करना भूल गया. Lol. Yeah, hi guys. I look much better now, hopefully. So, William Dalrymple, our favorite historian, who allegedly wrote to, I don't think it's allegedly, I think he actually did write to Bloomsbury to take away the free speech of Dr. Monica Arora, and prevented her from writing a book on the Delhi riots, her views on it, how or why it came about, as a protest of which Sanjay Dixit, whose book deal was already in with Bloomsbury to write that famous book, Unbreaking India. Sanjay Dixit, as a mark of protest, didn't take it out from Bloomsbury and brought it out from Garur Prakashan, which now has become a pretty stable right-wing publication. So that William Dalrymple, who has hosted Sanjeev Sanyal as well previously in a Jaipur Literature Festival, when Sanjeev Sanyal wrote the books Ocean of Churn, Land of Seven Rivers, he brought out facts and interesting factoids about ancient India and how awesome it was. And those facts, which have now become almost common knowledge among the Hindutva youth, William Dalrymple has now stumbled upon those facts and is now talking about those things everywhere. He has I think, a sinister plan here, which is why even Ash Sarkar is also doing a podcast with him. And Ash Sarkar is a far-left Bangladeshi Muslim girl, born, I don't know, but brought up in England. She is very, very far-left and pretty pro-Muslim as well. So I think the reason that Ash Sarkar is hosting William Dalrymple talking about everything being Indian and everything coming out from India, etc., and how all of a sudden ancient India is great, and how everything that was being touted as RSS history, quote unquote, or Sanjeev Sanyal was being called RSS ka dalla, his history was RSS ka history, or him not being a real historian, etc. So all that has now stopped, as William Dalrymple is talking on the same lines and often bringing out the exact same things that I have already known about from Sanjeev Sanyal's books, which were written about 10 years back. So the sinister plan that I think they have, which you will probably agree with me when you see this, I'm saying these things and creating a bias in your heads only in the beginning only because a lot of you won't be there until the end of the live stream. I'm just giving you my core view on this on this podcast. So in the beginning, because they are doing it right now and declaring everything to be Indian, not Hindu, of course, which we should not really have a problem with because everything back then was Hindu only. But interestingly, now they are in fact calling a lot of Muslim things and Muslim names and Muslim words as well Indian, which was the exact opposite up until the last 1 year even, that everything was brought in by Mughals. Gardening se leke, music, different kinds of food, architecture, everything was brought by the Mughals. This was brought by the Portuguese, this was brought by the British, this was brought by the French, etc. Now everything is Indian. I think their sinister idea is to therefore uh, force us to stop saying that these things are outsider influences or Muslim influences and stuff, etc. So they will make a case for how Muslim kings, ancient Muslim raiders, in Irfan Habib's words, or the absolute uh, Nazis and Hitler's people like Aurangzeb, all of them were as Indian as Chandragupta Maurya. I think that's the reason why now they are touting each and everything in India's past as Indian. They are no longer Mughals brought in. Okay, let's see.
In China, powered by Chinese silks, gunpowder, and paper. At the moment, you can't move for books and exhibitions about the Silk Road, the overland trading corridor between Europe and China, powered by Chinese silks, gunpowder, and paper. But, not to be too crude about it, ships are bigger than camels. They can carry a lot more stuff. And India, slap bang in the middle between China, West Asia, and Europe, was at the centre of a massive maritime trade powered by the monsoon winds. What kind of cultural and intellectual impact did India have outside of its borders? I'm joined by William Dalrymple, author of The Golden Road, to discuss how India was at the epicenter of the ancient world. We talk about the Roman appetite for pepper, goodness gracious me, and how one lucky rhinoceros stopped Genghis Khan from conquering the subcontinent.
ऋषि ये कब हुआ? पहले ही अप्रिशिएट किया था उन्होंने क्या, या फिर शी इज वाचिंग आवर चैनल सीक्रेटली?
Okay, William Dalrymple, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Great pleasure.
So I had so much fun reading this book, and as I got into it,
I had a lot of fun writing it, actually, including one of the nicest 6-month-long holidays of my entire life after
no
COVID.
one ever says they had a nice time writing a book. Did you not have the pit of self-loathing?
Well, the nice bit, of course, is not actually writing the book, but going off on the travel before writing the book. But it was great because I spent kind of 20 years writing the same book about the East India Company and the Mughals, 4 different books about that. And this was a complete release into what had always been basically a hobby, something I've loved but never actually specialized in. And it's also sort of connected me with when I was a kid. I used to love archaeology, and I used to spend all my teen holidays on archaeological digs.
Oh, wow.
And then ended up going down another rabbit hole and studying something that would have amazed my teenage self, which was the 18th century, which I thought was very boring and very late. And this is coming back to the stuff I always loved, which is archaeology, early history, the ancient world, but with this new angle to me.
So what was the first seed of the idea for this book?
It was while I was in Angkor Wat.
In the year 1947. When I was in Angkor Wat. Wow. That's a nice way to start a story that will get some erections among Hindutwadis. Now, yes, Anand Sridhar, I'm looking forward to your theory as well. Now, Fatal is saying, isn't that lady a commie? Yes, that is the point of this live stream, that we are going to scour through their ideas and with a fine-tooth comb and wonder out loud, why is a commie and formerly anti-Hindutvadi, anti-Indian ancient past historian now writing about the glories of ancient India and bringing out facts which we today in the right wing pretty much already know, directly or indirectly, because of Sanjeev Sanyal. Not everyone knows that Sanjeev Sanyal was the one who brought out these facts in public or in the mainstream, but everyone knows these things from different reels and podcasts later on, or screenshots of books and stuff.
Looking at this amazing, extraordinary religious monument, which is the largest Hindu temple in the world, but it's not in India, it's in Cambodia.
अरे Angkor Wat Buddhist temple नहीं है. See, एक छक्का मार के मैच शुरू किया है विलियम डालरिम्पल साहब ने. So, Angkor Wat is a Hindu temple. ये तो मुझे कभी पता नहीं चला until I turned a right winger in 2022 and learned the real relationship between Hinduism and Buddhism. So, what the fuck? This is exactly what I was saying in the beginning. Now they are going to declare everything Indian. And even Muslim things are Indian now. They are not Mughal influences or brought from Turkey and Kazakhstan, etc., or Fergana Valley. Now even the Angkor Wat is a Hindu temple. Ninori Singh, why do they sound so arrogant? Vedansh spams our live streams, and I really like it because it drives up the algorithm. Let's see what he's saying. Ash Sarkar is a leftist, communist, pro-Islamist, Hindu-phobic bigot. Same goes for William, but he's a scholar except few like Vikram Sampath, Meenakshi Jain, Sanjeev Sanyal, etc. We don't have scholars. We don't have scholars who are not Hindutvadi but help our cause, like Irfan Habib, Declan Quigley, Sumit Guha, Doybati Roy, Nicholas B. Dirks, Janki Bakle.
Yeah. And I already had my mind blown by that. And I was thinking of how would I...
Oh, his mind was blown by that, you see. But if our minds are blown by that, we are just RSS Kadalla.
formulate something to write, because it's so extraordinary and so unknown to us really in the West. I mean, we know
unknown to us people who don't read Sanjeev Sanyal
pictures, but history is completely opaque.
Opaque.
And when I was
itna opaque कि Sanjeev Sanyal saw right through it.
there, I got a WhatsApp from someone who said, "Have you seen this?" And it was a picture of this newly discovered Buddha's head, found not in India or anywhere that you'd associate with the Buddhist world, but in Egypt.
Oh, wow.
In an
Yes, bro, Ash Sarkar, whom I debated for a while in Twitter and gained a lot of followers. Yes, Ash, it's possible because there was something called Hellenistic Buddhism, Hellenistic Vaishnavism. In fact, today, the mukut you see on every Buddha statue, everywhere in the country, those few dots and stuff, which are supposed to be, I think, let's say, curly hair, I think, I'm not sure. That in fact was an influence from Greek sculpture. Before Greek influences, Buddha statues did not look like that. Thank you, Mithun Raj, for contributing to West Bengal's GDP.
Isis temple with
there is in fact Hellenistic Vaishnavism as well, where they equated Krishna with Hercules, and there is a pillar that survives to this day in Madhya Pradesh, dedicating it to Hellenistic Vaishnavism and writing down its principles.
Sun rays coming out behind the Buddha's head as if it's a sort of solar deity. So some weird Roman syncretism of the Buddha and Sol Invictus or whatever, or Surya, or I mean, I don't know what's going on there. But what was, apart from being an extraordinary object in itself, the most multicultural object you could imagine, an Indian holy man depicted on white.
Buddha is an Indian holy man. Oh my God.
Proconnessian marble from the Marmara Sea, which is now Turkey, found in Egypt in an Isis temple. Apart from that,
yeah, by the way, I found out a lot of this, what Kwasan is mentioning here, from Amartya Sen's book, Identity and Violence.
Just in itself being an extraordinary thing. To see how far west Indian ideas were reaching in antiquity, while I was, in a sense, in the extreme east of Indian influence in Cambodia on the Mekong. And I suddenly thought, this is a whole world that we don't know. It's also a world, I discovered pretty quickly, which has been heavily colonized by Indian nationalist ideas. Mm-hmm. And there's this long-standing idea since the 1930s that Indian influence in Southeast Asia was a military conquest.
Colonized by Indian nationalist ideas, guys. हमारा discourse, हम तो बोल रहे हैं कि हमारा system नहीं है, system उनका है. और वो लोग बोल रहे हैं कि उनका डिस्कोर्स भोसरी के इंडियन नेशनलिस्ट का डिस्कोर्स ने कॉलोनाइज कर दिया है.
And you had what a historian called R.C. Majumdar, a brilliant historian of the day, described as Hindu colonies in Asia. Now, it's subsequently become very clear that it's actually something much more interesting, which is Hindu and Buddhist and other Indian ideas spreading very thoroughly through Southeast Asia, but without conquest.
We're going to get into that. But the first thing I guess I want to ask you is that the title, the Golden Road, is a little bit of a misdirection because your focus is on sea lanes rather than
I'd say sea roads.
Sea roads, also described in Ocean of Churn, which is why the book is called that. It's entirely about India's maritime history. Sanjeev Sanyal at one point frothed at his mouth saying the phrase maritime history. Read about India's maritime history for about 3-4 years when Ocean of Churn came out.
which is a legitimate usage. You can say sea roads.
So what does this shift of focus onto seas and ships. What did that do to the prevailing view of trade between Asia and the West during this period from the kind of, was it like 5th century BC to the medieval period?
So
5th century BC में India था. Wait. There was no India before 1947. There was no Hinduism before Puranas. But now 500 BC is so Indian that even Mughal things later on are Indian. What is this mathematics? This is so insane. Now, what Polymerist is saying here, of course, yes. If today you debate with a commie friend again, you have to throw William Dalrymple's book at their faces. So I'm reacting to William Dalrymple the same way as Nupur J. Sharma was reacting to Dilip Mandal. Okay, I'm just a little cautiously optimistic of William Dalrymple. I'm not even optimistic about William Dalrymple. Yeah, he is doing my bidding. Fair enough, nice. But I am going to make fun of the situation for 2 reasons. Because everything he's talking about, Sanjeev Sanyal wrote about it 10 years back. Secondly, he was friends with Sanjeev Sanyal and didn't bother to, or maybe he was researching for 10 years, hopefully. But more importantly, he wrote to Bloomsbury to take away Dr. Monica Arora's right to express her thoughts in the form of a goddamn book. And these people accuse right-wingers all over the world of book burning all the time.
from the very beginning, one of the
I guess book prevention is better than book burning.
that interested me most was, why do we not know this stuff? If it's
Because we don't read Sandeep Sanyal. That's the easy answer.
true, as I'm saying in this book, that India changed the whole face of Asia with its not just
क्या बात कर रहे हैं? Okay, thank you Retrowave Universe. Also, thank you for contributing to West Bengal's GDP.
religious ideas, but it's philosophy, it's learning, it's ideas of cosmology, astronomy, mathematics, dance, sculpture, this whole package of India
Donald Trump power में आया, wokeism के साथ South Asia भी मर गया.
stuff which spreads. If it's true that this is as important as it seems to be, how come we don't know all this? How come that this is not something that we're taught at school? How come it's not something we all know like we know about?
How come we don't learn it in school? अब education system में change आने का demand भी कर दिया already. What the
Alexander
fuck?
the Great or the British Empire or all the other things that we are brought up with. And there are a number of answers to that, I think. The first
You didn't read Sandeep Sanyal. The second?
is colonialism.
Oh, acha.
We are inheritors of an educational system that has come out of a world where, as Macaulay famously put it, a single shelf of a good English library contains more of worth than the entire.
अब Macaulay का criticism from William Dalrymple. क्या दिन थे? RSS ने पोस्ट्री के William Dalrymple को भी co-opt कर दिया. ये दिन भी देखना बाकी था.
Of India and Arabia. Now, we laugh at that now, but
That was what my head of
echoes-
department told me when I asked why there wasn't more Indian literature on the course. He was like, well, is there any?
Yeah, exactly. So, yes, there is a great deal, and it's extraordinary.
Why didn't you advocate for Bangladeshi literature? Why didn't you advocate for Taslima Nasreen in your library?
And half the world was suckled on it. Literally, half the world's population today lives in countries where Indian ideas are now or once were dominant. So the easy answer is colonialism, because the British didn't
The easy answer is you didn't read Sanjeev Sanyal. But anyway, Nina, where did you get this news? Let me know, though. I'm very curious. Holy shit. This will be really awesome.
recognize it. But it's actually only half the answer. There are other reasons why we don't know this. And I think partly it's because it's been split into different stories. That the story of Buddhism is connected with this idea of the Silk Road.
That's a fair term, I think, Kwasan. Brahmin Dharma, academics का ये term है for anyone who followed Vedas. Ved people are Brahmin Dharmics, or that's Brahminism, and everyone else is Jain or Buddhist.
Spread of Hinduism into Southeast Asia is part of the story of the spread of Sanskrit. The story of Indian mathematics, as far as it's taught at all, and the fact that the zero and the numbers we use every day are Indian, is taught in history of science or something. And these things are all curated in different departments, split up. And particularly at the center of it, there is this idea which my generation got very excited by. And it was a new idea, amazingly, because it's now become so mainstream, is this idea of the Silk Road. This summer in London, there is a major exhibition, which I'll be seeing this afternoon at the British Library, and another major exhibition at the British Museum about the Silk Road, which is focused on China. And these maps you see where there's this more or less horizontal road leading from Chang'an or Xi'an, the terminus of the Silk Road on the South China Sea, on the far east of China, right through what's now Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Afghanistan, Iran, Turkey, and it lands at Antioch somewhere on the Mediterranean.
Bro, I don't have a problem with British historians. I read Declan Quigley. I read Nicholas B. Dirks. I don't have a problem with Western academics. William Dalrymple is something else. I have some grudge with him. Not personal grudge, but as a reader, as a man believing in free speech, I have a grudge with him. And especially because the stuff he's talking about, you will find everything of that in Land of Seven Rivers and Ocean of Churn. But if you say using William Dalrymple is more fruitful when you are debating with a commie, because they will say Sanjeev Sanyal just is a RSS Kadalla, Modi Kadalla, etc. For those reasons, yes, of course, William Dalrymple writing these things is more beneficial. But ठीक है, ये तुम लोग करो, हमको नहीं करना है, और हमने ये पढ़ लिया है संदीप सन्याल के बुक से.
And actually, that idea of the Silk Road, which is so dominant now, is not an ancient idea. Marco Polo doesn't talk about it. The Chinese don't talk about it. There is no mention of it before 1880, when a German colonial geographer called Baron von Richthofen, the grandfather of the First World War flying ace, the Red Baron, came up with this idea, the Seidenstraßen, which he put into a map of a potential colonial railway that he was planning to build from Berlin to what was then Peking. And it doesn't appear in English until 1936, when a Nazi sympathizer called Sven Hedin writes a book called The Silk Road, which comes into English. And by the 1980s, when I was a kid at university, it was beginning to be propagated. And my first book was about following Marco Polo down the Silk Road. But the Silk Road, in my opinion, does not really have any reality on the ground until the Mongols smash an enormous hole through the middle of Asia in the 13th century. Before that, and particularly in the classical period, the great age of Rome of Augustus, the aftermath of Antony Cleopatra committing suicide, is that Egypt is appropriated by Rome, colonized, which gives Egypt and Roman Empire a sea border with India, because of the monsoon winds. It only takes 2 months to sail with a sailing boat between a port on the Red Sea and a port in Kerala, or a port in Gujarat or on the Indus.
Well, I mean, this
Port in Kerala. Another factoid that will probably interest you, and probably a lot of you will find out many years later when some, again, Dalrymple or Dalrymple adjacent history or historian writes about it, or you'll find it out from reels anyway, but which was again brought to the forefront in mainstream by Sanjeev Sanyal. Martanda Varma, king of Travancore, defeated the Dutch East India Company at a time when the Dutch East India Company was way, way, way more powerful than the East India Company. And after he defeated them, it wasn't until the time that Japan became powerful. In between those many years, no other Asian power ever defeated an European power. And more importantly, the more funny thing is that Martanda Varma defeated the Dutch East India Company so hard that their Navy general actually became the Navy general for Martanda Varma himself. And he's buried there in that kingdom area only today. His grave still lies there. And Sanjeev Sanyal went to visit sort of a commemorative pillar on the beaches dedicated to Martanda Varma, where people pee and stuff. No one remembers that this pillar is dedicated to that great man.
one of the things which you write about, which is all of the...
As Sarkar is Muslim, which is what we had a banter about on Twitter. I said that, you are so much against patriarchy and you are Muslim, so why didn't you quit your Hindu surname? She said, whatever. See, she took screenshots of me and retweeted me and said that, see, they don't understand, we have to carry our father's surname.
these luxuries which were entering into the Roman world, whether it's pepper or silks or rhubarb, which, by the way, completely fucking spun me out because
Rhubarb and cream couldn't be more English.
there is nothing more English than rhubarb and custard. And like, my husband's from Yorkshire, and this morning I was like, "Did you know that rhubarb is from India?" And he was like, "You can't have everything."
It sounds like you've been in a kind of Sanjeev Bhaskar sketch.
Yeah,
or
no,
something.
I'm sick of you saying that everything is Indian.
Leonardo da Vinci,
Yeah, there's another group who say everything is Indian. They are called RSS Kadalla.
Indian.
Indian. I mean, that was my grandmother. She's like Henry VIII, Indian.
We had Sanjeev at the launch.
Oh,
And
really?
I had him do and he did a very funny. I do a podcast called the Empire Podcast, and he said it is an Indian podcast called the Umpire Podcast.
I don't remember either Land of Seven Rivers or Ocean of Churn or both.
And then he did his own sort of bespoke sketch for.
But you've got all these Roman writers who link silk and the fact that it's so sensuous and you can see so much of a woman's body through it to this idea of, well, we're decadent and we're weak and look at us, we're kind of on the edge of depravity.
The specific idea that the Roman writer you're talking about is complaining about, this is Pliny. And Pliny is a very sort of familiar figure. He's that peppery colonel, or the kind of, the kind of angry admiral propping up a bar at some.
हाँ, बोल लीजिए. हमने ये प्लिनी का स्टोरी तो हमने खुद बताया है मेरे चैनल से 2 सालों से. अब सबको जान लेने दीजिए. Then I'll elaborate on it a little more. But anyway, no, let me tell you first. And those of you who are regular viewers know what I'm talking about. It's the time of Emperor Vespasian in Rome. And Pliny the Elder is complaining about a trade deficit with India. कि भोसरी वाले हमारे से तो कुछ प्रोडक्ट खरीदते बड़ीते है नहीं, और इंडियन प्रोडक्ट्स रोम में इतना पॉपुलर हो गया है, हमारे महिलाएं, हमारे यूथ, सब के सब सारे सिर्फ इंडियन प्रोडक्ट्स खरीदते जा रहे हैं. हम इतना रोमन कॉइन कहाँ से लाए, हमारा तो ट्रेजरी खत्म हो रहा है. तो एम्परर वेस्पेसियन does a bit of tariffs and let's say decreases trade with India. And there are and then Roman coins are less in circulation, so Indian traders mint their own fake Roman coins. So today when we find Roman coins here and there archaeologically, we also find fake Roman coins.
Pub by the sea.
Yeah, we've gone soft.
Yeah, and he says, why do you need all this black stuff on your food? What is this pepper that people?
This is Pliny complaining about trade deficit.
Now, the young now put on their food, and as you said, why would we pay a fortune to bring a see-through material so that these decadent Roman matrons can show off their bodies in parties? Gemstones, we don't need them. And so he's sort of
बोल रहा है कि ये इंडियन इन्फ्लुएंस, ये इंडियन स्टाइल कैपिटलिज्म रोम में हमको नहीं चाहिए. तो ये क्या है, ट्रांसपेरेंट सिल्क विल, उससे बाहर से तुम्हारा बूब्स दिखेगा, ऐसे कपड़े पहनते हैं थोड़ी. क्या ये कॉन्वर्सेशन है. देखो, isn't it so similar today, except we are on the poorer side.
His argument is that the entire wealth of the Roman world, as he says, India is a drain for all the precious metals of the world, which is a very nice sort of reverse of obviously the 18th and 19th century thing when the West drains the West.
हाँ भाई, एक चोरी करके एक बिजनेस करके, ये सेम नहीं है मार्क्सिस्ट भाईजान.
Wealth of India into British pockets, into all those national trust houses that now have Indian treasures inside them, like Powis Castle.
Mm.
But in the first century, Pliny's complaining because he says, we make all this money, we do all this work, we conquer all these countries like Gaul, and then our rich, decadent aristocracy just buy a load of nonsense from India.
हमारा एलीट काहे इतना अमेरिकन चीजें खरीदते हैं, ये इतने एलिटिस्ट है, ये लोग इंडियन काहे नहीं खरीदते हैं. That's the conversation. That's the Gandhian socialist conversation we have today. That was what Pliny was doing for Rome back then.
Cotton, silks, gemstones, something called nard, which was the basis for Roman perfume, which comes from the Himalayas. I don't know whether you know your Christian Gospels, but in the Gospel of Matthew, there's a scene where Martha massages Christ's feet with nard. And all the other disciples complain, saying that we could have just sold this and given it to the money to the poor, and you're wasting it on him. And this is a measure of how expensive this stuff is. And recently, a papyrus has turned up, which has excited all the economic historians because it contains a detailed invoice for one consignment of goods. It's a very modern document. It's exactly what you take out if you were shipping carpets from India to Bradford today or something. And it has, in a sense, one column saying what's inside the container, another saying its value, and a third column saying the customs take that's going to have to be paid at the border for each one of these things. So it's ivory, nard, pepper, cotton, and silk. And if this one random consignment on one ship called the Hemaplon, we know the name of the ship even, if the Hemaplon had made it to Egypt and they got this crate to the Nile, shipped it up to Alexandria and sold it in Alexandria, the ship owner or whoever was behind this consignment would have been rich enough to buy one of the premier estates in Egypt or indeed central Tuscany. And
by the way, did you know, I think this point reminded me of what I'm going to talk about. So you will see in many movies about ancient Rome and ancient Middle East and stuff, anyone who is persecuted, they will say, okay, let's just run away to the east. All of that means India, by the way, okay? And Sanjeev Sanyal points out in either Land of Seven Rivers or Ocean of Chorna, I don't remember, that even Cleopatra, right? Yeah. So she was murdered along with her son, but she was murdered first and her son was murdered later on. But she sent her son to escape to India. He was on the way to India with some cash and some servants and stuff. He got accosted in between. He was caught and then taken back and executed. If he had just managed to escape, we would have another group of refugees happily living here ever and after. Cleopatra's son just barely managed to not escape to India.
Have enough money to join the Senate. So it was clearly a highly risky enterprise to go over the seas. There's pirates, there's shipwrecks, there's all manner of things that can go very badly wrong. You have to borrow money to buy this stuff in the first place. But if you get it back to Rome or to Alexandria, you are in, you're the Elon Musk of Alexandria. You're and if you do it twice, then you can buy up half of Rome.
What was Indian seafaring technology like at this time? Because this is me trying to remember from my Mike Duncan History of Rome podcast, which is where I get all of my information from, which is the Romans basically...
I like the ancients.
Yeah, about the ancients, also about everything. From my understanding, the Romans reverse engineer, basically. Is it a Phoenician ship? They reverse engineer.
Very good, Ash. Very good.
Yes. I did English literature, so I only know about the Phoenicians from T.S. Eliot. So reverse engineer a Phoenician ship, and that's kind of how they end up with decent enough seafaring technology to take over the Mediterranean. How does India?
I don't remember SDI, and I think she was forced to commit suicide. I think she probably didn't even know that her son in the end could not escape to India. I think she died knowing that he was successful in running away to India. She committed suicide. After that, her son got caught and then was executed.
Is seafaring technology match up? Is it that they've got all this stuff, so they don't need to be that good at seafaring technology? The ships will come to them, or did they have decent enough seafaring technology that they could then expand southeast?
So there's two answers to that. One is that clearly Indians were very proud of their seafaring technology. We have pictures of Indian boats in the Ajanta caves and on coins. But the reality is that unlike quite a lot of other places like Singapore and that, which
anyone who has followed Sanjeev Sanyal for more than 4 years or 3 years knows that this is what Sanjeev Sanyal has been saying for about 10 years, right?
Have invested money in marine archaeology, which is quite a sort of rich man's game. You have to have a sub and go down and lift this stuff up. And to be honest, the ASI, the Archaeological Survey of India, has simply not put the money in to bring the shipwrecks that we know are there.
What the fuck? Now he's even saying that why isn't our archaeological department finding out these ancient treasures, not treasures metaphorically even? Why isn't our syllabus changing? Why isn't Indian government pursuing these ancient history pasts of India? And why don't we know this in our textbooks?
Up and examine them. So there's a lot we don't know about ancient Indian seafaring technology. But what we do know is that India had an incredible gift just by its position, geography, and meteorology. Now, that gift is the fact that the Tibetan plateau ices over every winter and cold winds rake in. Then it thaws in the spring and summer, and hot winds blow out. Now, that sort of bellows movement, if you like, above India creates the monsoon winds every year, which blow fast in one direction.
That's why Bali Jatra happens in Odisha. People literally send off their husbands to their journey to go to Bali for business, for merchant type of things. And today it's been relegated to a simple ritual where they light some diya and put some paper boats on the in the beaches, okay, and it floats away. People have forgotten that it was the ancient tradition of sending your husbands away for business. And at the same time, few days later, when by the time they would have reached Bali, if that tradition of going to Bali actually went on, that's when in Bali there's a big receiving, welcoming ceremony that even today happens in Bali, inviting or welcoming those Odia and Bengali merchants. By the way, Odia and Bengali merchants are the predecessors to the Sinhalese people in Sri Lanka. Also something Sanjeev Sanyal points out.
Westwards from the west coast, eastwards from the east coast for 6 months, and then neatly reverse so they can blow you back again. So if you're an Indian sailor, you've only really got to put up a sail and build a very basic sort of canoe, even with an
Yes, and the stitched ships were at one point the most advanced technology in the world, but then we got complacent and stopped evolving our technology, so others fucked us.
Rig, until outrigger, like you get in the Goan fishing boats. And in 2 months' time, you're in Egypt. Then you have to wait a few months for the winds to reverse. And in August, you get back on your boat and you get sucked back all the way to India at speed. 2 months. While it would take 3 years from a camel caravan to go all the way plodding through Persia and the Himalayas and what have you.
And would you say that that's kind of the material basis for the spread of Indian culture, religion, commodities? It's that.
And that has meant that on the Indian coast, you've always had these trading communities, which in the 19th century, with the British Empire, end up in Kenya and the Swahili coast and everything. But before that, you have long distance traders since the time of antiquity. Archaeologists have found that when they were poking around with the corpse of Paul Ramesses II, which is perfectly preserved, they found grains of Indian pepper up his nose.
Sir, sab kuch pepper.
As part of
Are
mummified.
sab kuch Indian. Or pura page after page Ocean of Churn or Land of Seven Rivers se utha ke bol rahe hain.
Process, but that came from India.
Oh, I thought he was doing like lines
He
of
was
pepper or
snorting
something.
pepper.
Yeah, oh God, I'm really feeling it. I mean, for this time period that you're talking about in this book, how much sense does it make to talk about India at all? Because you've got multiple kingdoms, multiple languages. Is there a sense amongst people living on the subcontinent that they're part of something bigger, or was there a sense of what their identity was, what the polity was, limited to the boundaries of that kingdom?
Very important question, and there are very clear answers to, because it's something that's much discussed. India, unlike China, which for most of its history, remarkably, is a centralized state with a civil service that operates over the entire width of, not quite modern China, but certainly the
India
central
libertarian
Han
tha,
heartlands.
minarchist tha.
India, in contrast, is, with rare exceptions, as you say, a fractured multiplicity of different kingdoms. There are brief moments during the Mauryans under Ashoka.
अच्छा, decentralized के लिए गाली phrase ढूंढ लिया, ठीक है.
Again under Chandragupta and the Guptas, again under the Delhi Sultanate, and once again finally under the Mughals. When
तो भाई आज से हमको ये याद रखना है कि decentralization का एक और नाम है fractured kingdoms.
a lot of India is united, but it's moments. In general, it's disunited. And when the famous Chinese monk Xuanzang comes over, he...
अरे हर साल इसका एक अलग उच्चारण सुनता हूं मैं. हम जब छोटे थे तब तो पता था कि ह्यूएन सैंग, फिर पता चला वन जैंग, अब तो इसने क्या शेजवान चिकन ऐसा कुछ बोल दिया, और फिर फाहियन हमको पता था. फिर जब मैं संजीव सन्याल वगैरह पढ़ के अर्थशास्त्र खरीद लिया, उसके बाद मैं फाहियन का खुद का बुक भी खरीदने वाला था. इट वाज टू फकिंग कॉस्टली. वहां पे मैंने स्पेलिंग पढ़ा कि FAXIAN, फाशियान और फाहियान.
according to his rights, enters India at Jalalabad, which is now in Afghanistan. And he says, I'm entering India, a region of 70 countries.
Oh.
So he regards it as a very clearly defined region, not as a political unit, but as a region. And from the time of Alexander the Great, he arrives in what's now Pakistan, and he meets all these holy men in Taxila. They sound actually like Jains rather than Hindus because they're naked, which sounds like a Digambara Jain. But whatever.
Yes, Hindu sadhus are not never naked, right? Do you all know Alexander actually took back one Hindu sadhu to advise him on philosophy and stuff? Bichara died on the way in somewhere in Middle East, and he asked to be cremated there only.
Whatever they were. The Greeks call them gymnosophists, which doesn't help us understand much more in modern.
By the way, do you all know the insane conversations that those naked sadhus had with Alexander? There were interesting questions that Alexander asked, and they gave really, really witty answers. I'll see if I can find that. We have discussed that from our live stream about 1 or 2 years back. I think more than 2 years back. I'll see if I can find that once more. Do you all know about this?
Terms, but whoever these holy men were, they give a very clear definition of India, which is one that the British get given 1,000 years later or 2,000 years later. That India is bounded on one side by the Indus, on the other side by the Ganges, and on the south side by the sea. And that's in the Mahabharata as the extent of the lands of Bharata. So that definition of the geographical spread of India from Indus to Ganges, from Ganges to the Kanyakumari and back again is pretty consistent. And there's a very clear image of India as a united holy land, but it's very rarely one political unit.
And so, I mean, like, forgive me for being really Eurocentric, because when I, in my head, thought about Alexander the Great reaching India, the story that you're always told is that it's like summiting Everest, right? Like, look how far this guy went. And you don't really think, well, what was that encounter like? So when Alexander the Great encounters India and Indians for the first time, does he think that he's encountering barbarians? Does he think of it as like a lesser culture than, the Hellenic one he's coming from?
Well,
Are bhai, it's not like they had never heard of India.
Whether it's lesser or greater, I mean, the Greeks, as mass conquerors, always regarded everyone else as barbaroi, as barbarians.
You kind of have to in order to conquer them.
But that doesn't, in the sense, but they also regarded they also regarded the Persians as barbarians. So that's not it's not like they're actually saying these guys are just sort of woolly savages. It just mean they're different. No, the Alexander, we have a very clear set of images of what India was like for the Macedonians, and they are amazed principally by its wealth. It's a very rich land, they say, which is why it's so frustrating for Alexander when his soldiers then say, we want to go home. They fight the one battle against Porus on the Jhelum in the Punjab. And they then say, right, that's it. We're off back home. We've had enough.
Okay, here I must wake up my Protapaditya and Rantak Pakho homies. I think they know about it these days, but a lot of non-Bengalis don't know. There was a significant and gigantic, insanely powerful, with an elite military force called the Gangaridai Empire in Bengal. And their elite special forces were feared all over India. And they had an insane amounts of elephants in their cavalry. So hearing the news about that empire, among other reasons, their soldiers said, fuck this, bro, we are going back to our home, okay? And plus, they were very, very sick. Everyone had jaundice and typhoid and stuff. They couldn't handle so much rains. At one point, they met monkeys and they thought those are humans. They were so unracist that they thought, okay, these can be humans as well. They tried to negotiate with them and then realized that they are basically animals. And but elephants made them fear Indians a lot. And then on the way back home, they lost their way. I think Sanjeev Sanyal pointed this out as well, that they were tracing down some river up on the Gujarat coast, and they thought the flora and fauna is same as Nile. So they thought, okay, we are on the way. We have almost reached Nile now, and then they reach the sea at Run of Kutch, and they have to go back and stuff.
And Alexander is aware, and he sits down and weeps because he realizes that the richest conquests are still ahead, and he's never going to make them. So from that period, there has always been there lodged in the European mind that this is a very, very rich country.
I mean, you have as a consequence of Alexander the Great reaching India, you've got Sikandar being an Indian name.
Yeah, this is what I was talking about, guys. Sikandar ab Indian naam hai. No more are we living in the days of Mughals brought this and Mughals brought that. Ab Sikandar Indian hai. South Asian bhi nahi hai. Sikandar Indian hai. Holy fuck.
Which is, again, to go back to the Sanjeev Bhaskar sketch, is like Alexander the Great, Indian. I mean, what from the Indian side, what did they think they're encountering when they're encountering the Greeks?
Well, that's the great joke, is that there's no record of the Greeks at all in Indian sources. It's partly because there are very few ancient Indian sources from that period, but it is significant that in the Mahabharata or something, there's not a single reference. You do get later inscriptions from the Buddhist period talking about Yavanas, and there are Tamil poems about Yavana mercenaries and Yavana merchants, and there are inscriptions about Yavanas.
Yeah, because the sections that Mahabharata might have mentioned them were probably lost, and the Mahabharata we have today is a much later one. Now, let me show you this. I found few quotes. Okay, that conversation between Alexander and Indian sadhus. Okay, so check this out. When Alexander the Great's invitation on pain of death was rebuffed by Dunbamis, the Indian sage. Dundamis was the sort of Greekified name of that guy. Okay, just like they do with everything. Okay, like Chandragupta became Sendrakotas, Roxana, his Afghani wife, became Roxanne, and then allegedly we called him Alakashendra that way. So Alexander experienced a strong desire than ever to see Dundamis, though old and naked, was the only antagonist in whom he, the conqueror of many nations, had met more than his match. So it is said that soon after this encounter, Alexander invited a number of Brahmin ascetics noted for their skill in answering philosophical questions with pithy wisdom to Taxila. This article is from 2011. Okay, Alexander himself framed all the questions. So, which be the more numerous, the living or the dead? The Brahmin replied, the living, because the dead are not living. So how can we consider them in the numbers? Which breeds the larger animals, the sea or the land? Brahmin says the land, because the sea is only part of land. Which is the cleverest of beasts? Brahmin says that one with which man is not yet acquainted. Man fears the unknown. Which existed first? Alexander asks, the day or the night? Brahmin says the day was first by one day. This reply caused Alexander to betray surprise. The Brahmin added, impossible questions require impossible answers. Alexander asks, how best may a man make himself beloved? Brahmin says, a man will be loved if possessed with great power, he still does not make himself feared. Alexander asks, how may a man become a god? Brahmin says, by doing that which it is impossible for a man to do. Alexander asks, which is stronger, life or death? Brahmin says, life, because it bears so many evils. Fuck. Life has to live with so many evils. Death doesn't have to live with so many evils, so life is stronger. Then we have some more quotes here. This is a hilarious one. This is from southasia.ucla.edu. So, translator, a guy working for Alexander, asks the sadhu, he wants to know why you are naked. Sadhu says, ask him why he's wearing clothes. Translator says, he's asking the questions here. So Alexander was there, actually present. So Alexander says, he'll be the one asking questions. Sadhu says, questions give birth only to other questions. Translator says, Alexander is saying people who get funny with him get executed. Sadhu says, why? Translator says, because he is the king of kings and he wants you to stop asking questions. Sadhu says, king of kings? Translator says, he came all the way from a place called Greece, killing other kings, so he is king of kings, see? Sadhu says, fool of fools, master clown of clowns, maha idiot of idiots. Translator says, you want me to tell him that? Sadhu says, I said it, didn't I? Translator says, you are crazier than he is. He says he'll kill you right here, right now. Sadhu says, I'll have to die someday. What the fuck?
Who convert to Buddhism and dedicate pillars or gateways. You do get later inscriptions from the Buddhist period talking about Yavanas, and there are Tamil poems about Yavana mercenaries and Yavana merchants, and there are inscriptions about Yavanas who convert to Buddhism and dedicate pillars or gateways at Buddhist temples. But there's no sense of reverse excitement, if you said. It isn't like we've suddenly encountered the Europeans. Yippee! The Europeans are far more excited to discover the Indians than vice versa.
Well, it's like one of those things like the Battle of Lepanto. Very, very big deal for Europeans. You ask like a Turk about it, they're like, we've never heard of it. Like, not a big deal for us. Like,
so exactly that. And what you then get is, after you said you're a literature student. After Cleopatra puts her asp to her bosom and the suicide of Cleopatra, Octavius Caesar conquers Egypt. Within a generation, a geographer from Alexandria
Yeah. Dandamis's actual name was Dandapani.
makes a trip with the governor of Egypt to the top of the Red Sea. And he says, from the port of Myos Hormuz, which we know is not the biggest port, incidentally, on the Red Sea, from this one port, 250 ships a year sail in a fleet to India with the monsoon winds. And so if you then add the other big port, Berenike, to that, then we're talking 500 cargo ships a year going backwards and forwards with these winds.
And what would the equivalent be in camels, right? To compare the overland to the sea route, like one ship, how many camels would that be for a caravan?
Oh, I mean, sort of, 3,000, 5,000. I can't give you the exact
Your
figure,
ship to
but
camel
yeah.
conversion chart in your head.
We need a firm app for this to sort out our conversion rates. But camels obviously can only carry their saddlebags can fill, and a big seagoing ship of the Roman sort, and particularly the ones in Berenike, we know from the births, are called elephantine ships because they were made to transport elephants, which is one of the other imports. They used them for the elephants, tigers, and rhinoceroses, as you'll see in Gladiator 2 when it comes out next week, for the circuses.
Oh, wow.
So these are big ships, and you can get a lot of ivory. I mean, we don't like to think of it today because of our fears about the extinction of elephants and so on. But that was probably the biggest item of trade of all.
I mean, I really want to talk about the spread of Buddhism. What parallels could you draw between the spread of Buddhism and the spread of Christianity through the Roman Empire? Because it sort of seems to me there's something, similar.
लो रेट्रोइव तुम्हारा प्रश्न यहाँ पे पूछ लिया गया है. Nice.
Which is, this starts out as sort of a rejection of the contemporary power structure and hierarchy, and then suddenly it becomes a religion of the court. Like how?
So, very interesting question, and one that we can't yet answer, but I'm sure you're actually onto something there. You get Buddhist monasticism from about 150 BC, and there are surviving monasteries, Bhaja outside Pune, Karla, which are excavations into the rock of these enormous halls from this very, very early period. And that spreads up to what's now Pakistan, Afghanistan, into Central Asia. It spreads to the edge of Persia. Now, as we
रुको, वेदांश को हम उत्तर दे ही देते हैं. तो वेदांश, जिस टॉपिक पे तुम बात कर रहे हो, वो जो वर्ड है, वो चीज का, वो हम यहाँ बोलने से ही शायद डिमोनेटाइजेशन खा जाएंगे हम. तो I am skeptic a little on these things. Who knows if she's getting some cut money or not. It's best to be skeptic, but it's. But why specifically Mahakumbh, and why specifically for young girls? What's that thing about? What specific disease? It seems a bit too outlandish. Let this come out a little more.
No. You've got large numbers of Indians turning up on the Red Sea ports as sailors,
There was no India back then.
As warriors coming for a trip, coming to see another world. We got a huge amount of material in the excavations that have turned up from these Red Sea ports. Then, is it a coincidence that Christian monasticism begins where? On the shores of the Red Sea. St. Anthony of Egypt lived on the Red Sea, as did St. Paul the Hermit, the first two Christian monks.
Okay, now we're getting close to Christianity, Indian.
Sanjay Bhaskar was right all along.
So, I mean, that's an interesting thought. Which is
one reviewer ticked me off actually for saying that I make the joke of Sanjay Bhaskar at the Indian, saying Leonardo da Vinci Indian, and then by the end, more or less saying universities Indian and everything else. I
mean, like at that time, did Indian rulers consider the spread of Buddhism to be something akin to the spread of soft power? Did they go, this is...
The creepy thing is that with what calm and ease and casualness, at least Ash Sarkar is going on saying Indian kings, Indian past, Indian history, because like until 2 minutes back, these people were saying India didn't exist back then. It's all South Asia. अब सब कुछ हर प्रश्न में इंडिया 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 बोलते फिर रहा है.
It's actually in our interests that so many people are converting in far-flung corners of our world, in Southeast Asia, China, Japan.
We don't have anything like that, and I don't think that's how it worked. What we have is people doing well for themselves by traveling. So if you're a merchant, the first thing you do is trade with Rome. That goes high. In sometime in the 5th century, Rome goes down. What does Attila the Hun demand, incidentally, as ransom from Rome? 10,000 pounds of Indian pepper. He doesn't ask for Chinese silk. He asks for 10,000 pounds as the most valuable sort of thing he can ask from the city. So after Rome goes down, almost the last Indian product to make it to Northern Europe is some of the red garnet jewelry in the Sutton Hoo treasure found in 5th century East Anglia. And those contain red garnets from Rajasthan.
Oh, wow.
And that's kind of the last shipment to reach our shores for 1,000 years. The little bits may make it eventually via Baghdad or other Vikings or something. But the regular export of, for example, Roman Indian pepper, which reaches Hadrian's Wall on a regular basis, that ends by the 5th century. So there's an economic crisis in
500 AD तक ये सब बंद पोस्ट के. तो Throwaway is pointing out that Manusmriti bans seafaring. Yeah, because see, first of all, Manusmriti has shlokas from different time periods. Okay, vastly, insanely, hilariously illogical contradictions are there in the Manusmriti. कुछ शायद मतलब 1600 में भी घुसाया होगा, कुछ शायद 1600 BC में लिखा गया था. ऐसे चीजों से भरा है मनुस्मृति. तो मनुस्मृति से कुछ भी सीरियसली लेना बहुत प्रॉब्लमेटिक है एज अ स्टूडेंट ऑफ हिस्ट्री. But so the sections on banning seafaring, I think, as not that Abhijit Chavra is some sort of single biggest authority on history, but on this I agree with him that those sections were probably written after the Muslim invasions, and they saw that you go away leaving your family behind, being a merchant, you come back and your entire family is gone, your village is gone, etc. For those sorts of destructions, they might have said that no, don't leave your home, because Brahmins, temples, they were the beneficiaries of these merchants as well. क्योंकि भाई more circulation of wealth, interest payments तो मंदिरों को ही जा रहा था. उनको क्या पड़ी थी अचानक से ट्रेडिंग बंद करने की. तो वहीं से शायद प्रेशर में आके वो गांधीयन सोशलिज्म जैसा वेस्टर्न स्टाइल कैपिटलिज्म ये सब चुतिया आइडियाज उनके दिमाग में आ गया. बट आई थिंक इट वाज बिकॉज ऑफ मुस्लिम इन्वेजन्स. I don't see any other reason why the fuck they would do it.
India, because they're not getting the gold that these get. So they have the Tamil merchant guilds who are getting their act together by this stage and have their own military. They even have their own assassins to track down anyone that kills their members. It's a great, rather sinister idea, like Game of Thrones.
Netflix commission that. I want to see the...
So now we have Ash Sarkar demanding a Netflix documentary on the stuff Sanjeev Sanyal wrote 10 years back. ये क्या? What am I? अरे भाई मुझको थोड़ा धीरे बात करना पड़ेगा. I'm getting too excited in the middle of the night. What am I supposed to react to this? What the fuck is going on here? ये हम बोलते तो चूतिया अगर बन भी जाता तो भोसरी वाले बोलते कि नेटफ्लिक्स अब मोदी का गोदी मीडिया बन गया. नेटफ्लिक्स आरएसएस का हिस्ट्री बना रहा है. आरएसएस के हिस्ट्री पे पिक्चरें हो रहा है. देखो, this is not the India I grew up in. What the fuck?
Tamil assassins.
The Tamil, can you imagine them? There is one bonkers film where Ashwarya Rai turns up teaching martial arts on Hadrian's Wall at this period, incidentally, but well worth looking up. But anyway, back to.
So do they turn southeast?
They turn east, exactly, and so you begin to get in Indian texts like the Ramayana in their final form and the Mahabharata references to Savarna Bhumi. Savarna Bhumi is Southeast Asia. That whole
Sanjeev Sanyal ki jai ho.
Landmass is Savarna Bhumi, the lands of gold, and particularly.
Before he says this, let me point out. I don't know if he says this as well. Singapore is basically Singhapura for lions and stuff.
You have a reference in the Ramayana where Sugriva, the Monkey King, says to Hanuman, you must go to Savarna Dvipa, the island of gold, which is probably Sarawak, which had gold mines. And so you start finding little Tamil gold workers' tools with Tamil inscriptions from about the 5th and 6th century. Just
Godank. this is unfair. The day, coincidentally, the day Abbas Maldahir pointed out about casteism in Buddhism, that very day, in that very night, we discussed the papers discussing casteism in Buddhism. That's the very first research paper I ever discussed from this channel. So if you go into my playlist called Caste Papers, that's the very first paper you'll see.
Rome has gone down. These guys now have to work a bit harder to get their gold, and they have to go down to Southeast Asia. So from the 5th century, you get, first of all, a few inscriptions, then you start getting wooden Buddhas, then finally you get little tiny handheld images of Vishnu. By the 6th century, you've got large images of Vishnu, incidentally with a Khmer physiognomy. They're not looking Indian. These guys are looking much more like Southeast Asians.
Yeah.
And finally, you get temples, initially very clearly in the Pallava style from southern India, but later going off on their own trajectories. And then you get something even weirder. You mentioned how fractured India was. India remains fractured for much of this period, meaning that you can raise some big temples, particularly if you're a Pallava or a Chola. But in Southeast Asia, you've got the Sri Vijaya Confederacy, which is this sort of sea lords, again, rather Game of Thrones, these sort of merchant lords who run Java and Sumatra.
Yeah, Sandeep Sanyal points out that the post of the Zamorin, the port that was handled by the Zamorin, Sandeep Sanyal argues that his name was probably Samudrin, and that was just a distorted pronunciation.
And tax shipping going to China through the Malacca Straits. And these guys are super rich and can afford to build the same sort of thing. But
अरे ये लौड़े का आर्ग्यूमेंट ना मैंने कुछ ही दिन पहले एक दोस्त से भी सुना। भाई ये रेसिज्म अगर ऐसा था तो भाई उसके साथ ही दोस्ती करके उसको ही अपना मतलब ऑलमोस्ट बेस्ट फ्रेंड बना के युद्ध भी कर लिया। ये क्या अजीब तरह का रेसिज्म है। और वैसे भी रावण हिमसेल्फ was not from Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka was his administrative unit. He was a fair-skinned Brahmin king from the Noida area.
But on a bigger scale. So first you get Borobudur, which is the largest Buddhist monument in the world and the most sophisticated Buddhist monument in the world, built in the 9th century. Then finally, and most famously, you get Angkor Wat in the 12th century, which is about 10 times the size of any of the Chola temples. It's 4 times the size even of the Vatican City. And that's just the area within the moat.
So you said that there was a prevailing theory that Indian expansion, or the expansion of its sphere of influence into Southeast Asia, that initially everyone thought it was military and it was violent. And then what you're arguing is that, well, actually it wasn't. Of course, then you've got the Chola invasions in the 11th century, I think. So what happened?
So that, just to qualify that. So what you're getting is armed trade.
Okay.
So you've got the merchant guilds who clearly got their own warriors traveling with them. Because if you're
armed trade, so you see, just like today, private businesses hiring retired Navy SEALs, retired Special Forces people from all over from all countries, retired SAS guys, retired Australian SAS guys, retired Green Berets. I don't know if Indian Special Forces guys get into this private contracting stuff, but retired Navy SEALs and stuff, all of them are private security for big businesses, for gigantic ships and stuff, okay? Because you have to protect those ships from pirates. Same armed businesses. क्या? और ये भोसरी वाले हमको Western capitalism, Western style capitalism सिखा रहे हैं.
You're traveling with gold and gemstones. Of course, you're going to get pirates.
You want a guy with a big sword.
So, and there is some evidence that you even get a bit like early East India Company forts on the coast of, Chennai or Madras or Bengal, Kolkata, that you're getting the merchant guilds running their own little fortification as well as having their own thing. But then it's not a conquest. They are the guests of these merchant kings in Southeast Asia. And in due course, you get the Cholas. Historians are divided on this, and there are nationalist Indian historians who would call it what you just called it, an invasion. Most historians opt for the slightly more neutral raids.
Okay, raids.
So the Cholas, who are these.
हाँ भाई, रेस का ऑब्सेशन तो तब होगा ना जब तुम्हारे किंग्स ऑल ऑफ अ सडन 500, 600, 700, 800, 200 सालों, मतलब ब्रिटिश तो 200 सालों से थे ही, बट ऑल द मुस्लिम किंग्स वर आल्सो प्रीटी फेयर स्किन्ड, तब अगर 800 years ऑलमोस्ट का एक कंडीशनिंग हो जाए कि तुम देखते ही रहो कि फेयर स्किन पीपल आर ऑलवेज इन पावर, तो थोड़ा बहुत सोसाइटी में एवोल्यूशन होता है, तब से जाके फेयर स्किन के लिए एक ऑब्सेशन बनता है, उसके पहले ये था ही नहीं. और social mores change when society changes, when different invasions happen. Like Sanjeev Sanyal points out, in Valmiki's Ramayana, Jayanta the crow sits on Masita's breast. I've heard that in Tulsidas's Ramcharitmanas, it's said that Jayanta the crow sits on Masita's feet, because by then breasts have a different meaning. उसके बाद तुम breast नहीं बोल सकते, मेंशन ही नहीं कर सकते, उसका सिर्फ सेक्सुअल कॉनोटेशन बन गया है तब तक, क्योंकि वो कब लिखा गया है.
Extraordinary, very brilliant rulers of Tamil Nadu conquer Sri Lanka, burning, incidentally, a lot of the Buddhist monuments there, such as Anuradhapura, seizing their jewels, and we have this in the Sri Lankan chronicles, bewail this looting. And then there's one inscription on the big temple in Tanjore, which says that the great king Rajendra Chola sent a war fleet out to Suvarnabhumi and attacked this place, that place. And there's a list of about 15 ports that he's meant to have attacked and brought back loot. There's one or two references to a viceroy, but the general scholarly opinion, because these guys are still sending ambassadors out to China only 2 or 3 years later, which is implying that it's not over. They may have lost, may have had their city looted or something, but certainly it sounds more like a raid than a conquest. So, with that one exception, where you've definitely got a military expedition, people putting horses into boats and jumping off a boat with their swords waving and spears flying, and archers and all the rest of it. With that one exception of the Cholas for 1016, 1025. Almost all Indian contact with Southeast Asia is peaceful. And you get the first merchants, and then, very important, you get the...
I'm about to tell you why it was not peaceful in that one instance.
Brahmins. Why do the kings of Southeast Asia want Brahmins? Because they offer not only a link with the gods, you're not just the local strongman, you're Mahendra Varma. So you are protected by Mahendra, or Surya Varma, protected by the sun god Surya.
What's a mountain? Mahendra Parvat in Cambodia, right?
Also, these guys are literate, so they bring the Pallava script, they do administration. Why do the Brahmins come? Because they get paid, given the estates, and given princesses, which is a pretty good package as far as the Brahmins are concerned. So you get something for everyone. The merchants get their trade, the Brahmins get jobs and wives, the Southeast Asian rulers get administration by experts.
So why wasn't it more military? Was it just that there was an easier and more mutually beneficial deal available? Or was it that it would have been actually quite difficult to preserve your lines of supply and stuff when you've got a sea invasion?
Well, it's not, as sometimes Indian nationalists like to imagine, because Indian religion is terribly peaceful, because unlike, again, the imagined ancient India of peace and prosperity, there's extreme violence in Indian history. If you read the battles of the Pallavas and the Chalukyas, they're constantly wasting each other's cities and raping each other's women and destroying holy temples. And this is going on very energetically. And there are many inscriptions.
अच्छा. तो ये थोड़ा ज़्यादा ही बोल दिए, एग्जैजरेट कर दिए. और डिस्ट्रक्शन ऑफ टेम्पल्स जो था, वो तो था कि नहीं, हम इस भगवान के पूजा और बेहतर तरीके से करेंगे, तो आइडल उठा के अपने जगह फिर बिठा देते थे.
And that's this. And equally, both the Pallavas and the Cholas conquer Sri Lanka very violently and take the goodies from there. I suppose it's not an easy thing to do a military expedition to Southeast Asia. And
really hard to invade islands.
Yeah, it's quite hard. But also, if you're making lots of money by trading with them, and they've got gold that you can buy very easily, and the merchant guilds are very successfully channeling that back home, you don't really need to.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
What stops the expansion of the Indosphere, as you call it? Why does it stop?
So there's one other major thing before we do the decline.
I can find the post.
Numbers.
Oh, okay. Numbers.
Very important. And again, so every Indian uncle knows this, but the numbers that we call Arabic numbers in the West are Indian numbers, and the Arabs get them from the Indians. We get them from the Arabs, which is why we call them Arabic numbers, but their place of origin is India.
So you see, the British or the Europeans get their numbers from Arabia, so they call it Arabic numbers. Arabians didn't get it from Arabia.
And at a time when in Europe you're still getting long multiplication with MCVVXV1 times MCVVV1.
Does my head in just thinking about it.
The Indians have got 10 symbols, one of which is 0, which makes it all much easier. And they've got decimal place value and tens, 100,000, tens of thousands, and all this sort of stuff. And those ideas spread first to the Arab world. By a stroke of luck, the first viziers in Baghdad are former Buddhists who are Sanskrit literate and know all this stuff. And these guys, they're a family called the Barmakids, send a mission to Sind, and in 776, the Sind Raja, who wants peace with this enormous, very fierce empire.
Yes, I came to know about this from Amartya Sen's book, Identity and Violence.
Sends the works of Brahmagupta, who's this early Indian mathematician.
Indian.
It seems to be a sort of compilation of 2 of his books, which the Arabs
और 10 साल बाद ये लोग इस सब कुछ को हिंदू भी बोलने लगेंगे.
call the Sind Hind. And this becomes the basis for Islamic maths and astronomy. It's simplified and clarified by a genius called Al-Khwarizmi. Al-Khwarizmi is from what is now northern Uzbekistan. And he writes a book which has a long, unwieldy title of the Book of Indian Mathematics According to Completion and Balancing. Now, that's too much of a mouthful in any language.
Sounds like a real page turner.
and so it gets known very widely as algebra, from which we get the word algebra. And his name, Al-Khwarizmi, the man from Khwarazm, which is Khiva, northern Uzbekistan, becomes the basis. Al-Khwarizmi becomes the basis for our word algorithm.
God damn it.
So there.
Arey, RSS ke dalle. Do you think we should identify these people by caste? Not Islamic math, Arabic math. What the fuck?
The ultimate Sanjeev Bhaskar
Oh my God, it
bullseye.
really is.
Algorithm, Indian.
Algorithms,
Algebra, Indian.
Oh my God. But so let's talk
But the
about
decline,
The
yeah.
decline. So why does it stop? Is it just that, you've got these other hugely complex, well-armed, organized societies hemming in the Indosphere? Is it just that, I don't know, that you've got the rise of the Mongols? Like what's going on?
2 things, and you've already touched on both. So the first thing is in the 1100s, you get a bunch of Turks, and the inscriptions specifically call them Turushka, or occasionally Lord of the Horses. And these guys are new converts to Islam, pretty rough bunch of nomads, still tough, use horse archers. And they first overwhelm the Punjab, capture Lahore, and then they capture Delhi in 1192. And so you're getting an invasion of a bunch
And then they
of
fuck things up.
quite rough people who've got no interest at all in speaking Sanskrit, like the earlier generations had longed to do. And Sanskrit by this stage has spread all the way from Kandahar in Afghanistan
Wow.
through
Oh, acha. And Kandahar, also known as Gandhar.
to sort of Bali and Java and Indonesia. These guys are not interested in that. And then you get a second blow a generation later when the Mongols don't conquer India, but conquer everywhere else in Asia. And so you get
But they get really far down, like into Burma, kind of. don't they?
there's one
Really
little
far.
raid into Burma,
There's Abhijit Chavda's argument that they were polytheists, so they didn't want to fuck with India.
but the Khaljis, who are the Delhi Sultans, successfully fend off the Mongols, including an extraordinary moment when the Mongols come and invade Delhi. And, well, actually the Tughlaqs let loose the sluices of this hydraulic system that they developed. And the Mongols are swept away in a sort of tidal wave. It's very
Oh, wow.
impressive.
Baba.
I thought ditches. I thought like horses versus ditches. Dig a good
A lot
ditch.
of all that. And then there's this other moment, according to one source, when Genghis himself, who would have been obviously the big mother of all disasters, he comes through the Punjab and he sees a rhinoceros and he thinks it's some sort of devil. and turns away and instead destroys Poland in the end.
Thank God for that rhino.
But for that rhino.
Really did India a solid.
But the result of all this is twofold. One, you've got a hostile border now between India and the Mongol Empire, which stops traders passing over it. So what had been a very porous route for Indian monks and holy men going backwards and forwards to the northern half of the Indosphere is now cut. The second thing that happens is that a lot of the highly educated scholars and writers and teachers who had been living in what was the great caravan cities of Balkh and Merv and all these wonderful places in Central Asia, a lot of them flee to Delhi. And Persian becomes the language of government, not just initially in Delhi, but also eventually in the next 200 years, the rest of India, including Hindu India. It's the diplomatic language, it's Persian. So it isn't that the Sanskrit world disappears. It's never disappeared. It's still there now. But it's subsumed beneath a second layer, like sediment falling down to the sea. And then, of course, later on, you get the English, the East India Company, and there's a third layer. And you can look in this a variety of ways. If you're a Hindu nationalist like Narendra Modi, you can look at it and say 1,000 years of slavery. I, as an outsider, and I, in a sense, don't have a dog in this race. I'm coming.
If you don't have a dog in this race, then why did you write to Bloomsbury to not publish Dr. Monica Arora's book?
From Scotland. To me, it's the richness of Indian society that you've got all this amazing Sanskrit stuff, all this amazing Taj Mahal and Mughal miniatures above that. And finally, you've got all these amazing people who can like Salman Rushdie, who can write English better than English, Warranties Roy. So it's a very rich layer cake. But as we know, the Indian nationalists have made a great deal of political capital saying that this is slavery, which I don't think is historically accurate, though it's certainly true that the initial invasions of the Turks in the 12th century was accompanied by temple destruction and a lot of iconoclasm. When you go around something like Madhya Pradesh today, and a lot of the early temples just have their faces smashed in of all the idols and so on. So there is
a moment of dramatic pause. Let's enjoy a dramatic pause here.
As you know, a big culture war in India at the moment. We've got a Hindu nationalist government running the country.
And
also
this is tells
very...
a particular story about, there have been these Muslim hordes.
Particular story. We are saying exactly what William Dalrymple has been saying for the last 43 minutes.
Which have, invaded India, suppressed the culture, and they want to do it again.
Yeah, and that is a popular narrative, partly because a generation of left-leaning intellectuals after independence were so horrified.
Ab leftist ko gali bhi de denge kya? What is going to happen, guys? Any guesses?
By the violence of partition that they slightly downplayed in the history books. The destruction that did take place, just like...
Fuck. This is almost like porn. I think we will rewind this, and instead of unlike porn, we won't watch it in mute, but we don't have to watch his face, of course. Look away from your phone, and just listen to this in the calm and peace of the midnight Indian sun, not South Asian sun. Midnight sun, okay? Because moon is the sun. Now, for those of you who are living outside, enjoy your actual sun. We are going to enjoy this under the midnight sun. Marxists have downplayed this. There have been bad stuff. कुछ बाकी नहीं रखा. बोल दिया कि why aren't we taught these in schools? Why isn't the ASI digging these things out? And why isn't Netflix making a documentary on this?
Yeah, and that is a popular narrative, partly because a generation of left-leaning intellectuals after independence were so horrified by the violence of partition that they slightly downplayed in the history books the destruction that did take place. Just like when the Normans took Anglo-Saxon England, a great deal of destruction took place.
Isn't this a moment of victory Isn't this a moment of significant narrative victory? Shouldn't we break out our champagne bottles right now? Fuck.
There was a lot of, pillage, burning, looting, and raping. And a new world, the normal
Yeah,
world,
Anand Sridhar is being spoil sport. Isko bhagao, comment se.
was built over the Anglo-Saxon one in the same way in 12th
I
century.
suppose the difference is, though, is that with
No, them admitting this is a victory.
telling the story of the harrying of the North or something like that, no one really holds it against the French because it's not a live
Shit.
political issue.
Correct.
Whereas when you're telling the story of temple destruction by Muslims within the context of post-partition, or you're trying to tell that story now when you've got, love jihad, conspiracy theories and all that kind
Correct.
Okay, so when was the best time to tell these stories? First, we couldn't have told them because partition has just happened. We can't do this. We need to do nation building. Now we can't do this because there's a Hindu nationalist government in power. So when? Kab aayega ye samay?
thing. How do you write history books which tell difficult truths in political contexts like that?
So this was the big challenge writing this book. And also, there's another challenge, which is that
Very challenging.
you've got this sort of weird thing whereby Mughal history is now identified with sort of lefty Marxist historians like Irfan Habib, while ancient
Hamare
history,
Habib.
the period of ancient glory, which the BJP and the RSS look back to as the pure, unadulterated wonder of the past, is the dream period of the Hindu right. And the challenge writing this book is, in a sense, to strip away both mythologies, to admit that a lot of temple destruction did take place in the 12th century, but also to sort of hold up that amazing things happened in Hindu India, and we shouldn't be ashamed to say it just because the far right are obsessed with it. So I've tried to tell a version in this book which provides no historian is neutral, but I am an outsider still, despite living there for 40 years, to try and give as neutral a picture as I possibly can of an extraordinary period of history.
And when you try to be neutral as an outsider who's living in India for 40 years, you end up writing to Bloomsbury to not publish Dr. Monica Arora's book. And you also write neutral history, which Sanjeev Sanyal, RSS Kadalla, has written 10 years back, when you are so neutral.
Which, for various reasons, is not well known. And where it is known in India is often mythologized. So you get a lot of old uncles talking about nuclear weapons in the Mahabharata, and yes, and sort of and the flying, the gods moved around in helicopters, and the rishis had the internet. So it's very easy to obviously to take and plastic surgery in the Vedas and this.
But I mean, it comes from. I was thinking.
Plastic surgery Vedas mein nahi tha, Bhosri ke Sushruta ne kiya tha. It's admitted medical fact.
This about the Sanjeev Bhaskar sketch, which is
skin grafting to be more precise.
The Indian uncle pointing at everything and saying Indian. There's a tragedy in there, which is this is a man
Correct.
who's been told you've got no culture, or if you do, it's inferior, and you've got no history.
Correct.
And so this is somebody saying, no, I do have history.
And also there is this sense that the Indian uncle is correct in saying that this is an extraordinary culture. The Indians did invent a lot. It's true. But it's become so discredited by wild claims about atomic weapons and the Mahabharata and the rest of it that no one takes it seriously. So I'm trying to do something which will probably lead to the book being hated on both sides, but in a sense, wind back into.
अच्छा विराज, अलेक्जेंडर ने कब इन्वेट किया इंडिया? पूरा का पूरा इंडिया एकदम इन्वेट कर लिया. थोड़ा बहुत नॉर्थ वेस्ट में इन्वेट किया था, और फिर वहाँ पे एक नेगोशिएशन हो गया. वहाँ पे their kingdom ended, and most of their army and government people went away. They left their bureaucrats behind, and Seleucus Nicator and his descendants, I guess, not his descendants, but some bureaucratic system was left behind. Descendants of whom are today the Hazara tribes in Afghanistan area, and therefore we have some Greek and European-looking women in the Kafirstan region of Pakistan. But Seleucus Nicator had a very amicable relationship with Chandragupta Maurya. Seleucus Nicator's daughter was married to Chandragupta Maurya, for God's sake. Where the fuck is this invasion of India? Indo-Greece की बात हो रही है, मैं भी उसके ही बात कर रहा हूँ.
Factual, realistic narrative, what ancient India did achieve, but also to tell the left in India, this is just because the right love this period, it doesn't mean it's not an absolutely extraordinary period that you should be very proud of. Extraordinary things happened. And it's actually true that the story of this has been suppressed.
No, the Kalash tribes are the Kafirstan people. The Hazaras are the descendants of the bureaucrats of the Greek government. Okay, Kalash are not Greek. Yeah, but they look European as fuck, तो कहीं और से होंगे.
Partly by academic fashion, partly by the story of the Silk Road, partly by colonialism. There's a whole variety of reasons we don't know this, but we don't. And it's important you do know it. So I've tried to find a way of writing this.
Yes, Biharis and Bengalis are different. I get that, yeah.
Battlefield, this culture war history, in a way that's accessible, full of characters. It's got a quarter of this book is footnotes, because this is such a contested period. There's nothing which I can't back up with serious sources. And so far, I have to say, I mean, I was very nervous about this book because A, it's a period which I had no idea anyone was interested in or not, because frankly, no one's written a book about it since A.L. Basham's the Wonder that was India in the 1940s, 50s.
So there are no recognized specific groups who are Greek descendants, right? What about the Malana people, the locals of Malana who don't want people to talk to them or touch them or get near them? I used to hear they were also descendants of Greek armies, right? So right now the consensus is that nobody is Greek in India.
And partly also because it is such a minefield. But I have to say, this weekend, #1 in India.
Nice.
And #4 in Britain. So far, so good.
I mean, I've got one last question for you. I mean, we were joking about rhubarb and that my brain just was completely scrambled by finding out that it was from India.
What the fuck is rhubarb? They're not talking about the instrument rhubarb, right? What is rhubarb?
There's a really famous Stuart Hall paragraph from, I think it's Old and New Identities, Old and New Ethnicities, where he says, I'm the sugar at the bottom
That's
of the
a very
English cup of
Bengali
tea.
intellectual reference, if I may say.
It's the most Bengali thing about it, you know, and it says, well, some others are the tea itself. Through writing this book, or from your 40 years of living in India, has it made you reflect on Britishness and what Britain is and what it means to be British in a different way?
Living in India definitely has. And that's why, in a sense, I spent the last 20 years writing about the colonial period. There's 4 books, which now...
अरे सेटलर कॉलोनियलिज्म है वो. सेटलर कॉलोनियलिज्म को कब से हम एसिमिलेशन बोल सकते हैं? ये इंग्लिश ग्रामर का भोसड़ा कब बनने लगा?
A box set called the Company Quartet, which does the story of the East India Company, which is this an extraordinary story too. It's how one British business from one office in London takes over the richest country in the world.
On a skeleton staff as well. Not many people.
On a skeleton staff, using largely Indian mercenaries.
And did it make
and paid for by money borrowed from Jain merchants in Calcutta.
I didn't know that.
Mawaris, and the Jains lend the monies. And so it's
Rishabh, Abhay, kahan hai
one
wo?
thing that East India Company is clever about is it always repays its debts on time, which is not true of a lot of Indian rulers. So even if you have a heroic Maratha warlord, he might just hang up the moneylender by the ankles if he asks for his money back with interest. But the Brits looted, pillaged, raped, looted, did all the stuff, but they repaid their debts on time.
I mean,
So the
what did it
Mawaris
make you
loved
think
them.
about British identity and the composition of Britishness? Because I suppose when I think about Britishness, I go back to the canon. I think about Chaucer and I think about Shakespeare, and then I find all of these international thumbprints all over these quintessentially English texts.
Well, what's fascinating is in a sense looking at how composite language English is, because right back in your early Chaucer, you'll find the word pepper, which is originally a Tamil word, or ginger, which is also a Tamil word. Tamil and Sanskrit are there very early on in the English language. And then in the 18th century, it's just overwhelmed by bungalows and cummerbunds and pajamas and all the rest of it.
Bazaar to Middle East.
Thugs?
Thugs, definitely. So there is a deep, ancient link between these cultures. And one of the plus points of the English language is that it is a language which has been allowed to absorb all this. Unlike French, which is often quite a fiercely policed language.
Oh, Spanish as well. It had a very strong sense of its own identity and resisted hybridization. But William Dalrymple, thank you so much for joining us on Downstream this week.
Thank you, Ash. Very nice to be here. Thank you so much. Thank you for getting me out on time for my lunch.
What a weird, what a curious turn of events. Let me check some comments and then we'll go offline. By the way, out of topic, but 2 out of 3 white British soldiers had STD serving in India in 19th century. Yes, they were fucking anyone and everyone they could lay their eyes on, which is why Anglo-Indian, the race came about, and which is why missionaries started creating their schools. Some of them did it just for conversion. Some of them did it just to give a place to live with dignity to those kids who were begging on the streets and had a white skin wearing dhotis and stuff. Why does Abhijit Mitra seethe on Dalrymple? I don't know. Anand is saying, nah, it Aishwarya. Anand Sridhar is saying, take the Ahoms who came to India. They didn't need to do any of this. They instead imported Brahmins from other parts of India to actually assimilate. Yeah. All the Shakas, Hunas, all of them did this stuff only. Amazing stuff by Sanjeev Sanyal and Shomode and others, right? Oh my God, don't get me started with Anglo-Indians. Macedonia was a small, Machiavelli was advised, yes, Chanakya advised biggest empire. It's all about narrative, okay. Including each other, since we know that MSM have much higher rates of STDs. AM hasn't heard about this book probably. Any more questions? I am inclined to discuss some portions of the Land of Seven Rivers, guys. Why am I frozen? What the fuck? Am I frozen? Is my audio coming? Let me just find out some interesting sections from Land of Seven Rivers, okay? Where's my Land of Seven Rivers? Land of Seven Rivers. Land of Seven Rivers किसी ने लैंड किया है क्या मुझसे भूसरी के? वहाँ है Land of Seven Rivers. रुको. Wait. Let me just bring the Land of Seven Rivers for a while. Yes, polymers, they can do it because Thomas Aquinas made it possible for them to do so. Now, this is that famous RSS Kadalla manifesto that turned me into a Hindutwadi. And this set me on the path. And then I was fully brainwashed by Sitaram Goel's How I Became a Hindu. But I've underlined so much of it. Let me just find out if I can stumble upon some of the specific insane things, okay? I'll just find out some interesting underlined places. Let's see. I don't know what I'm going to read, okay? Randomly underlined places. The first thing that should be clear from the outset is that there are no pure races, Sanjay Sanyal writes. With the possible exception of some tiny isolated groups, the vast majority of Indian tribes, castes, and communities are a mixture of many genetic streams. Another underlined section reads, in other words, after thousands of years of mixing, Indians are most closely related to each other, and it is pointless splitting hair over who is more Aryan and who is more Dravidian. कौन से साल का है ये? एक बार check करते हैं. I think 2011 or 2012, right? Okay. Then another line here. This is the geography area. Okay, this is not that fun for me. I don't like geography for some reason. Let me get to a bit of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. Let's see if I've underlined anything here. The real juicy stuff comes in the sections where which were being discussed by Dalrymple here. Okay, let's read this part. The problem is that there is no living river in modern India that fits the description of Saraswati. This has led some historians to argue that the Saraswati is a figment of poetic imagination. Others have tried to identify it with the Helmand River in Afghanistan, also known as Harahvati. My audio is coming, right? Yeah. However, the Rig Veda itself describes the geographical location of the river. In the Nadi Stuti Shukta, hymn to the rivers, the major rivers are enumerated from east to west, starting with the Ganga. The hymn clearly places the Saraswati between the Yamuna and the Satluj. There is no room for doubt. There is only one river that could fit this description, the Ghaggar. Its riverbed may be dry today, but satellite ground surveys unequivocally tell us that it was once a mighty river. And yes, I have confirmed this on Google Maps myself. You can still see the pathway where it once might have been active. It is very difficult to escape the conclusion that the Rigvedic people and the Harappans were dealing with the same river. There is a further twist. Unlike later texts, the Rig Veda does not mention a drying Saraswati. Instead, it mentions clearly that the Saraswati entered the sea in full blow. Hence the name Saraswati, okay? Sarasvati, okay? A mother whose breasts are full of milk, okay? वो meaning है Saraswati river का, Shoroshboti. Because she's nurturing this all these lands around the river. Hence the name Saraswati. Instead, it mentions clearly that Saraswati entered the sea in full flow. This would suggest that the text was composed before 2600 BC. Even more intriguingly, the Rig Veda mentions poets and compositions from an even earlier age, although their works have not survived, because citations to hum dete hi hai. Then another underlined portion says, furthermore, the Rigvedic people are clearly aware of settled agriculture and of cities, both inhabited by themselves and those inhabited by their enemies. They are not wild nomads from the steppes as has been suggested. Admittedly, the Rig Veda does not obviously reflect the Harappan obsession with municipal order, but then it is a religious book and should not be expected to delve into the intricacies of sewage systems. Trolling. यहाँ पे एक बहुत एक ब्यूटीफुल एक लाइन है. हाँ ये दो एक जगह तुमको सुनाना है. The Rig Veda frequently, not this part, but it will come, about how a template for the Indian psyche was created in the Saraswati civilization. The Rig Veda frequently mentions the bull and the horse. The former is a common theme in Harappa art, but the horse appears to be conspicuously missing. Another section says, thus one could argue that it was the horse and not the Aryan who was imported. Indeed, there is independent evidence to suggest horses were familiar animals even in central India from a very early stage. This is debated today, of course. The Stone Age rock paintings of Bhimbetka, which is countless years old. What about 50,000 years old or something? Or no, 10,000, 20,000 years old. The rock paintings of Bhimbetka show horses. The Neolithic site of Mahagara on the Belan River has yielded horse bones, which may indicate a familiarity with the animal from a pre-Harappan era. In short, there may have been plenty of horses, which fits with the fact that so-called non-Aryan tribes in the Rig Veda also appear to have horses of their own. The really interesting debates relates to lions and not horses. I'm just reading the underlined portions, okay? Nevertheless, the river was not forgotten. We find its memory echoed in legends, folktales, and place names. Modern Hindus still worship the Saraswati as the goddess of knowledge, recalling the river's role as an inspirer of hymns. This is why. If they were asses, our archaeologists would call them bones of asses and not bones of horses, right? Inspirer of hymns. In Haryana, one of the seasonal tributaries of the Ghaggar is called the Sarsuti. Farther south, a seasonal river called Saraswati rises in the Aravallis and flows into the run of Kutch, not far from the estuary of the Lost River. Deep in the deserts of Rajasthan, the Pushkar Lake recalls many legends about the goddess Saraswati. Where the Yamuna joins the Ganga at Allahabad, there is a legend that the Saraswati flows underground. Perhaps it is a way to remember the fact that the Yamuna was once a tributary of the Lost River. These are civilizational memories. It may be significant that the slaying of Vritra is specifically mentioned in a hymn eulogizing Saraswati. Perhaps the ancients too struggled with their inner demon, the suspicion that they may have somehow brought on their downfall by interfering with nature. The real genius of this is the spot I was talking about. This is the part I was talking about. Oh, the drawings you mean, okay. The real genius of the Bharatas, however, may lie in the fact that the Vedas do not confine themselves to the ideas of the victors, but deliberately include those of sages from other tribes, including some of the defeated tribes. Thus, the hymns of the sage Vishwamitra, the great rival of Vasishtha, are given an important place in the compilation. In doing so, the Bharatas created a template of civilizational assimilation and accommodation rather than imposition. The Bharata tribe, the Battle of 10 Kings. Incidentally, a king is called Dasharatha. It becomes a title. It was a powerful idea and would allow over time for people in faraway places like Bengal and Kerala to identify with this ancient Haryanvi tribe. Haryana is better than, Bengal is better than Haryana, I hear. Then the older section of the Avesta, called the Gathas, are said to have been composed by the prophet Zarathustra himself. They can be read as Rigvedic Sanskrit by making a minor phonetic change. The Avestan H is the same as the Sanskrit S. This we know these days. Thus, the word Sapta Sindhu becomes Hapta Hindu. Shinto is Hindu, or Hafta Vasuli, Sapta Vasuli, Ahom, Assam, etc. Another interesting indicator of the sequence of events is the use of terms Deva and Asura. In the Rig Veda, the terms apply to different sets of deities and do not have clear connotations of good and bad. The god Varun, for instance, Varun, Sanyal's son's name, the god Varun, for instance, is described as an Asura. However, in later Hinduism, the Asuras would be identified as demons and the Devas as the gods. In contrast, Devas refers to demons in the Zoroastrian tradition of Persia, while the word Asura is transformed into Ahura Mazda, the great lord. Since the Deva-Asura dichotomy is not clear-cut in the Rig Veda but becomes very distinct in later texts, it is reasonable to argue that these opposing sets of meaning came to be attached at a later date. What caused this separation? Did the Parsu have a religious dispute with the Bharatas? As they moved into the Middle East, was the Persian nomenclature influenced by the Assyrian god called Asur? One may never know for sure, but these are some more intriguing possibilities. Like Hindus, the Yazidis believed in reincarnation and avatars. They pray facing the sun at dawn and dusk and have a system of endogamous castes. No Manusmriti. Their temples with canonical spires look strikingly similar to Hindu temples. The peacock angel, Tawese Melek, plays a central role in the religion. The peacock is a native to the Indian subcontinent and is not found naturally in Yazidi lands. Is it possible that the Yazidis have somehow preserved an ancient link to India because they were slaves taken away, Hindu slaves taken away by Muslim kings, which is why most Yazidis look like people from Mumbai and stuff? Indeed, the Yazidi themselves have a tradition that they came to the Middle East from India about 4,000 years ago, around when the... Oh, okay. I heard that they were slaves, taken as slaves as well, around when the mature Harappan civilization would have begun to disintegrate, or perhaps the Battle of the 10 Kings took place. Does one of these events explain the spread of R1A1 gene, the genetic lineage that we have discussed in the previous chapter? The world of the Harappans and the Rig Veda dissolved as the Saraswati died. No matter what one thinks of the Harappan Vedic debate, two things are clear. First, geography and the forces of nature played an important role in the evolution of Indian history. Second, the subcontinent has witnessed a great deal of migration and churn. People, ideas, and trade have moved in different directions at different points of time and for different combinations of reasons. It is very different from the conventional view that Indian history is only about unidirectional invasions from the northwest. We now turn to India's second age of urbanization, centered in the Gangetic plains and recalled in the great epics. The Age of Lions, this chapter is called. Let me find some interesting places. This is not important. Interesting example of... The Ramayana is traditionally said to be the older of the two texts. Although some scholars dispute this, there are several versions of the epic, including versions that remain popular in other parts of Asia. The most prestigious and possibly oldest version, however, is the one composed in Sanskrit by the sage Valmiki. He was a former brigand as well as an outcast, someone we would call today a Harijan or Dalit, that is a member of the lowest castes. It is interesting that this early example of Dalit literature would come to occupy such an important place in later orthodoxy. Bhai Ramayan ko Dalit literature bol diya. It's such an evocative landscape that it is likely that Valmiki either visited it or had heard detailed descriptions of it from merchants plying the Dakshinapath or southern road. There are small details that seem too much of a coincidence to be purely imaginary. The lake of Pampa, where Rama meets Hanuman, is indeed a beautiful place with lotuses in bloom and a multitude of birds, surrounded by a ring of rocky hills. Not far away from this site is a sloth bear reserve that recalls Jambavan, Hanuman's sloth bear friend. Archaeologists have found the remains of several Neolithic settlements in the area. It is easy to believe that this setting was once populated by a Neolithic tribe that used the monkey as a totem and gave rise to the legend. Thank you, PM Narendra Modi ji, for joining our live stream. I hope you ushered in the age of capitalism. The text itself explains the name in terms of primordial emperor Bharata, Mahabharata they are talking about now, who is said to have conquered the whole country but plays no important role in the central plot. The epic is therefore told as a history of the Bharata people. Since there is no independent evidence of an all-conquering emperor Bharata or Bharat, one wonders if this is an echo of the powerful Bharata tribe mentioned in the Rig Veda. Did Sudasa's victory, Sudas was the leader of the Bharatas, did Sudasa's victory against the 10 tribes create a dream of civilizational nationhood that gets echoed over the millennia? Look at this way of writing history. There are interesting parallels with the Chinese view of civilizational nationhood. Long before the country was united into an empire by Qin Shi Huangdi in the 3rd century BC, there was a strongly held belief that the country had once been united under the revered Yellow Emperor and his 4 successors. There is no archaeological evidence to support such a grand empire, but it has been a very powerful idea throughout Chinese history. Indeed, it is embedded in the way China views itself even today. There would have been a savanna phase when lions from Iran could have made their way through Balochistan and then into tiger territory, which would explain why the earliest artifact depicting a lion in the subcontinent, a golden goblet, was found in Balochistan. As Harappan urban centers were abandoned and populations migrated to the Gangetic plains, the lions would have taken over the wilderness. Over time, they would penetrate as far east as Bihar and northwestern Orissa, coexisting in many places with tigers. Eastern and southern India nevertheless remained the exclusive domain of the tiger. Interestingly, Rig Veda does mention the animal, meaning the lion, although it accords it far less importance than the horse or the bull. This poses the obvious problem of how the Vedic people knew of the animal if it did not exist in the Saptasindhu heartland, because it might have been a later interpolation. One possible explanation is that the word for lion, Singha, at this stage of linguistic development was also a generic word for big cats and was loosely used for both lions and tigers. Like today, sher is used for both lions and tigers. As we shall see, this dual use of the word is responsible for the naming of Singapore. However, Dr. Divya Bhanusingh Chavda, a leading expert on the Asiatic lion, still feels the Vedic description of a hunt suggests lions rather than tigers. Another explanation could be that while the lion was not common in the heartland, the Vedic people encountered it in lands to the west of the Indus. This would gel with the lion goblet found in Balochistan. Yet again, it must be admitted that we do not know enough about this period to be absolutely sure. Interestingly, the lion plays an important role in the Mahavamsa, a Pali epic that is the foundation myth of the Sinhalese people of Sri Lanka. According to the Mahavamsa, the Sinhalese people are the descendants of Prince Vijaya and his followers who sailed down to Sri Lanka in the 6th century BC from what is now Odisha and West Bengal. The story tells us that Prince Vijaya was the son of a lion and a human princess, which is why the majority population of Sri Lanka calls themselves Sinhala, or the lion people, Shinghal, okay? Like people of Vanga are called Bangali or Bengali, in that way. Shingho, lion, Shinghal, people of the lion. And the country's national flag features a stylized lion holding a sword. Equally significant is the fact that the Tamil rebels of northern Sri Lanka chose to call themselves the Tigers. The ancient rivalry between the two big cats remained embedded in cultural memory, even as the animals themselves face extinction. Sadly, there are now a mere 411 Asiatic lions left in the... Yeah, ये तो अब थोड़ा change हो रहा है. Okay, then both the Uttarapath and the Dakshinapath would have been busy highways, with the people plying these trade routes carrying not just goods but also ideas, because this was also a time of great intellectual expansion. The philosophies of the Upanishads, Mahavira and Gautama Buddha are all products of this milieu. It was in the Deer Park at Sarnath, just outside the city, that the Buddha delivered his first sermon. As an important crossroads, the place was already an established hub of commercial and intellectual activity by this time, which is precisely what attracted him to it. Tourists visiting the Buddhist archaeological site at Sarnath often do not realize that the spot is sacred to other religious traditions too. Just outside, the visitor will see a large Jain temple dedicated to the 11th Tirthankara. Similarly, the archaeological museum next door contains many idols and artifacts of the Brahmanical tradition. The place is still sacred to the devotees of Shiva. In fact, the name Sarnath is a short form for Saranganath, meaning Lord of the Deer, which is another name for Shiva. This should not be surprising, as Varanasi has long been and remains a very important hub for Hindus of the Shaivite tradition. It may explain why the Buddha found a park with sacred deer at this place. Even today, there is a temple dedicated to Saranganath, less than a kilometer from the archaeological site. It is a small village temple that almost no tourist visits and is a peaceful place to linger in. There are detailed descriptions of plastic surgery, ophthalmic couching, dislodging of the lens of the eye, perineal. Okay, let's read this paragraph. The intellectual innovations of the age were not limited to religious philosophy. For instance, the period also witnesses the systematization of Ayurveda, India's traditional medical system. A compendium compiled by Sushruta, who also lived near Varanasi, contains a long list of sophisticated surgical instruments and procedures. There are detailed descriptions of plastic surgery, ophthalmic couching, which means dislodging of the lens of the eye, perineal lithotomy, cutting for bladder stones, the removal of arrows and splinters, and the dissection of dead bodies for the study of anatomy. Unfortunately, most of this knowledge would be lost in the medieval era. Nevertheless, some techniques survived in the isolated pockets and were witnessed by European visitors in the 18th century. Listen to this part. This includes the famous rhinoplasty operation that took place in Pune in March 1793 that would change the course of plastic surgery in Europe and the world. Kawasji was a Maratha, more like Parsi, bullock cart driver with the English army during its campaigns against Tipu Sultan of Mysore. He was captured and had his nose and one hand cut off. What a nice people. After a year without a nose, he and 4 others submitted themselves to an Indian surgeon who used skin from their foreheads to repair their noses. We know little about the surgeon, but 2 senior British surgeons from Bombay Presidency witnessed this operation and sent back detailed descriptions and diagrams. The publication in Europe in 1816 of their account could give birth to modern plastic surgery. This subchapter is called The Empire of the Lion. Alexander wanted to push on eastwards, but his troops were tired after years on the march. Also, there were stories about a large Magadhan army that would be mobilized against them in the Gangetic Plains, I guess Gangaridai. With this army in virtual mutiny, Alexander was forced to turn back. However, he did not go back the way he had come, but faithfully chose to sail down the Indus under the mistaken belief that the Indus constituted the upper reaches of the Nile. The Macedonians thought that if they just sailed down the Indus, they would end up in the Mediterranean. The lack of geographical knowledge proved deadlier than the sword. Nearchus, Alexander's admiral, tells us that Indians wore clothes made from white cotton. The lower garment reached below the knee, halfway to the ankles. The upper garment was thrown over the shoulder, and a turban was worn on the head. Nearchus was describing the dhoti and angavastra, clothes that have been worn since Vedic times and continue to be worn even today. He goes on to say that, the Indians wore ivory earrings and used parasols against the sun. They also wore leather sandals with elaborate trimmings and thick soles to make themselves look taller. Then after several years of effort, Chanakya managed to cobble together a large army, possibly with the help of the hill tribes of Himachal. He and Chandragupta slowly took control of the northwest of the country. Then they steadily encroached into the Gangetic Plains. Around 321 BC, they defeated the Nanda king of Magadha, we all know, Seleucus Nicator. Judging from the terms of a treaty between the two in 303 BC, the Mauryan army decisively won the war. Chandragupta gained control over Balochistan and Afghanistan. Seleucus also gave his daughter in marriage to a Mauryan prince, perhaps Chandragupta himself. Unlike the empires of Alexander and the First Chinese Empire, the Mauryan Empire lasted at least 3 generations as a complete unit. The hill on which he spent his last days meditating and fasting is still called Chandragiri in his honor. The renunciation of power remains a powerful theme in later Indian history. When India became independent in 1947, Mahatma Gandhi refused all positions of power and made way for his protege Jawaharlal Nehru. Civilizations have long memories, both conscious and subconscious, and the legendary deeds of ancient heroes can echo down the centuries. We see this in China too, where Mao Zedong liked to have himself compared to Qin Shi Huangdi. The second Mauryan emperor, Bindusara, ruled from 297 to 272 BC. His reign appears to have been a period of relative calm and consolidation. We have records of how the Mauryan emperor exchanged ambassadors and trade delegations with Alexander's successors in the Middle East. There is a tale that the second emperor, Bindusara, asked Antiochus of Syria for figs, wine, and a Greek teacher of rhetoric. Antiochus sent the figs and wine but refused the last request on grounds that Greek law did not permit the sale of scholars. There appears to have been a succession struggle on Bindusara's death. The winner of the fratricidal struggle was Ashoka, who was crowned in 268 BC. He was not his father's chosen successor but would rule the empire for 40 years. In 260 BC, Ashoka would expand the empire for one last time to include Kalinga. He now ruled the whole subcontinent except the small kingdoms. But let me get to the more insane stuff. This, though, we all know these days. The Mauryan lions and pillars were mostly made from sandstone quarried at Chunar near Varanasi. It's, I think, in the Mirzapur district, where the Ganga nudges the Vindhya range. We now know the exact location of the quarries to the southwest of Chunar Fort, close to the famous Durga temple. There is an article, if you find it on the internet. The stone used to carve the Sarnath lions, modern India's national symbol, would have made this journey from quarry to workshop and then to Sarnath. I found several stone carvers who still work the Chunar sandstone in and around Varanasi. Yes, it's still there. Some of them were carving lions to adorn homes and temples. Somehow the new sculptures all have the characteristic grin that one sees on the Mauryan lions. Is this conscious choice or just the unconscious weight of history? Scholars like John Irwin argue that some of the Ashokan columns may actually have been put up by his predecessors and that Ashoka had merely added his inscriptions to them. Ashoka held on to power for too long. Despite his protestations about following the path of righteousness, he was unable to give up the trappings of power even when he was too feeble to rule effectively. Contrast that with the attitude of his grandfather and Chanakya, the founders of the empire. The problem of aging rulers would haunt India through the centuries. By the time the Mauryan Empire was established, the second cycle of India's urbanization had been underway for a millennium. Takshila in the northwest was not just a vibrant city but an important intellectual hub. In the east, Tamralipti, our Tamluk, where Shubhendu Adhikari is an MP from, or is an MLA from, was established as a major port. It is likely that Emperor Ashoka sent his son Mahindra on a mission to Sri Lanka from there. The site is located across the river from Kolkata and is not far from the port of Haldia. The name Tamralipta means full of copper. Tamra se lipt hua, and may have originally been linked to export of copper goods. Archaeological excavations have revealed punch-marked coins from this period. As we will see in the next chapter, the port would evolve into an important international trading hub in subsequent centuries, and maybe the son of Tamralipta will do this again for Bengal. Where is it mentioned that Ashoka became Buddha before Kalinga War? In some inscription only. I don't remember if I have underlined that or not, so I might have passed that by already. Chunar Fort has now been converted into a jail. It used to be, people used to say that anyone who gets hold of Chunar Fort will be victorious in any war because the way it's positioned, you can see three directions from the top of the fort. The imperial capital of Pataliputra, of course, was the most important city in the empire. Megasthenes, the Macedonian ambassador to Chandragupta, tells us that Pataliputra was surrounded by massive wooden palisades with 64 gates and 570 watchtowers. The city was shaped like a parallelogram, 14.5 kilometers in length and 2.5 kilometers in breadth. Lots of descriptions. Megasthenes tells us that he had seen all the great cities of the east, including Susa and Ekbatana, but that Pataliputra was the greatest city in the world. Where are the Bihar haters? He also gives detailed instruction on the management of forests, especially those that supplied elephants. Yeah, this is about Arthashastra. Summer was deemed a good time to catch elephants, and 20-year-olds were considered of the ideal age. At the same time, the capture of pregnant or suckling females and of cubs was strictly forbidden. Imperial highways extended from Takshila to the port of Tamralipti in Bengal. Mauryans were merely formalizing the Uttarapath that had already existed for 1,000 years. The Macedonian ambassador Megasthenes very likely used it to visit the imperial capital of Patliputra. As discussed earlier, this highway survives as NH1 between Amritsar and Delhi and as NH2 between Delhi and Kolkata. And I've ridden my bike on that. Meanwhile, the sea routes were gaining in importance. We know that by Mauryan times, there was coastal shipping between Tamralipti in Bengal and Sri Lanka. Links with Southeast Asia were also being established. It is likely that the ships initially hugged the coast, but as we will discuss in the next chapter, nautical skills and shipbuilding technology were soon advanced enough to allow merchants to directly cross the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal. Mauryans introduced an important innovation, the use of columns and rock inscriptions to record their presence. It is remarkable how this chain was deliberately sustained not just by Indian kings but also by rulers of foreign origin. It is as if these kings were conscious that they were just a moment in the history of a very ancient people and they wanted to record their place in it. One of the best places to experience this is Girnar Hill in Junagadh, Gujarat. At the foot of the sacred hill, there is a rock outcrop with an Ashokan edict. More than 3 centuries later, a Saka, that is a Scythian king called Rudradaman, added his own inscription next to it. The second inscription records the restoration of the Sudarshana Reservoir. As we shall see, Junagadh would be the focus of important events when India gained independence in 1947. Barely an hour's drive away is Gir National Park, the last refuge of the Asiatic lion. Now, the age of merchants, this chapter, okay? The imperial court, with the collapse of Mauryan hegemony, the outer edges of the empire. No, let's do a separate live stream on this because there's insane amounts of things I have to get through. Then why waste it here? Let other people know that I'm going to discuss this sections of this book, okay? आजकल कोई अपने नए नाम से नहीं आता. Okay, then let's end the live stream here. We'll do a separate live stream on just sections from Land of Seven Rivers as a trip, nostalgia trip. Okay, then thank you for joining the live stream, guys. Good night. This was a lot of fun.
যদি সবাই ফিরে যায় ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা সবাই ফিরে যায় যদি গহন পথে যাওয়ার কালে কেউ ফিরে না যায় তবে পথের কাটা তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে যদি আলো না ধরে ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা আলো না ধরে যদি ঝড় বাদলে আধার রাতে দুয়ার দেয় ঘরে তবে বজ্রানলে আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা চলো রে আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা চলো রে যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে একলা চলো একলা চলো একলা চলো একলা চলো